So, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome along to this episode of In Conservation With. Today, I'm joined by a very good friend of mine, actually. He's been my friend. I mean, he'll tell you when we first met, but we've known each other for, well, since the devil was a boy. Sacha Barbato. He's a travel advisor, oblique agent, is also a very passionate birder and wildlife enthusiast and conservationist. He's one of the go-to people that I use whenever I have a bird that I cannot recognize. He's the first person I contact, and he's so modest. He actually never says to me, "Oh, I don't, I'm the wrong." He always says to me, "I'm the wrong person," but he's the man I go to. So before we actually talk about your actual your work as a travel advisor, consultant, agent, I'll have to talk to you about your birding so that people can get to know who you are. So Sacha, tell me, as my American friends always say, was there ever a spark bird? Was there a moment in your life where you suddenly realized that you had an interest in natural history?
Well, that's interesting. I think I've always been interested as a young child in started off with insects, and I think with many people, maybe it starts off with one species and then slowly evolves into another one. I was fascinated by insects. I still am now, actually. I run a moth trap most evenings and absolutely love insects. But I slowly started meeting people that were interested in birds and birding. And I think ever since I was about 11, 12, there wasn't any spark moment where suddenly I realized that birding is going to be my passion for the rest of my life. But I do remember seeing spotted flycatchers, weirdly, for some reason. I remember being 11, 12 and being absolutely fascinated by those. So I don't think there was a spark moment, but ever since I was about 11 years old, birding has been, along with travel, which is good because the two kind of go hand in hand, really. They've been my two sort of passions in life, really.
Yeah, because what people may not know is that you're half Italian, aren't you? Are you?
Yeah, so I grew up half Italian, grew up in Italy, and grew up in sort of estates in the south of Italy where there wasn't any wildlife. None of my family were interested in wildlife, so I don't know where the passion came from. It's just bizarre. I guess it's a bit like yourself, David. I suppose your family weren't the ones who got you into birding, but I don't know. It seems to happen to some of us. We for some reason we just love wildlife and. And we don't really know where it stems from.
And then one fateful day when you were 18, you were trudging through Brent Reservoir in North London because you were living in London.
You were only a couple of years older than that, I'd say, but yeah.
And I was walking up,
yeah.
You were walking down, we bumped into each other.
Yeah, and I remember it as though it was as yesterday. So you didn't often bump into people in the Brent Reservoir, and especially youngish birder with binoculars around his neck was a surprise as well. And then we got chatting, and ever since that, we then ended up working together as well, which I have some fond memories of Wormwood Scrubs and the time we were working together. And this shows how long ago this was, because we were wearing suits, binoculars around our neck, having a business meeting, walking through the scrubs, and then occasionally stopping every time a pied flycatcher or a pipit would fly up. And the meetings used to go on quite a long time with all the distractions that we had. But yeah, some fond memories, definitely.
Yeah, because at the time, for those who don't know, I used to run and own a small marketing agency which looked after small publishers. We helped publish magazines and sell advertising space. And I hired Sacha as a salesman, and he turned out to be brilliant. And you actually then moved on to work for a travel magazine, and I think it kind of went from there, didn't it?
Yeah, I did, and I think it was thanks to you helping out with the initial jobs when I was a young 18-year-old that I then managed to get all the other jobs. In fact, so I owe you a lot, and then moved into travel ever since I was in my early 20s. worked for a large high street agency, and my passion for travel had always started ever since I was about 16, traveling, backpacking around Europe, interrailing, always with my binoculars, and then traveling around America. The time when you could get a Delta Air Pass where you could travel all around the States, unlimited travel for a month. They don't exist anymore. That's how long ago this was. And it was brilliant because I could travel I'd get on a plane, shoot across to Key West and up to New York and across to California, and always with birding sites in mind. And yeah, absolutely been traveling ever since, until recent events, which have made it a bit more tricky.
And of the places you visited, since your youth, I mean, what's been the most, what's your most favourite place to visit?
Gosh, well, they're all so different, and I've been to now sort of over 40 countries. I've got fond memories of so many of them. I think I love the mountains and I love the Himalayas. For me, migrant birds is a big passion, and the islands in South Korea, islands in Thailand, where I was recently, they have a big draw to me, and I absolutely love migrants, especially Asian migrants. So they're probably my sort of favorite countries, but there's so many, and each one is different, and there's such amazing wildlife throughout. I mean, places like Madagascar, for example, has got some of the most bizarre species of insects, of birds, and that's another one of my favorite places as well, I'd say. So many.
Yeah, you say in your experience, you say they've included hiking and whitewater rafting in the Himalayas, skydiving over the Grand Canyon, which must have been amazing, touring through New Zealand in a motorhome, whale watching off the coast of California, sailing around the Fiji Islands. I mean, it sounds amazing. And now you're based in Norfolk.
I am, yeah. And for those who know Norfolk in the UK rather than Norfolk, US, it's a great birding site, and I'm kind of a bit spoilt where I am now. But my heart is still in urban birding as well. And whenever I travel, I do love city birding, and I do still hold great memories of birding in London with yourself, David, and all the sites there where I pretty much learnt a lot about species and migration, and a lot of my learning regarding birds was in London and in cities. But yeah, Norfolk is a great place and I'm out in the countryside here at the moment, so I've been quite fortunate in terms of lockdown. It's not been too much of a hardship, whereas I'm sure it's a lot more difficult if you are in a city around the world at the moment, and especially if you can't get out, of course.
Yeah, I mean, life has changed. Life has been flipped completely on its head. I mean, for me, for example, I mean, I'm in Spain, and in fact, I've just missed the clapping. I was hearing actually when we first started, because they clap every night at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock.
I didn't realize they did that in Spain as well, but that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Every night since, it's been like 60 odd nights now they've been doing that. And
wow.
Up until the day when they actually eased the lockdown. Before then, they used to, I don't know whether it was a live band playing a couple of numbers on the rooftop, but they used to do loud music, like a bit of a carnival, that suddenly stopped at 1:45. But life has changed. I mean, I was supposed to be all over. I mean, I'm supposed to be in Serbia now. That's, how life has changed. And I've had to cancel the whole of my year practically until the autumn. And hopefully things might change. The question I have for you, I suppose the biggest question really is, I see a lot of stuff on the news at the moment. I'm sure the Zoomers here have too, where 1 minute it's okay to go somewhere. For example, the British government is saying it's okay to go to France and then go to Ireland. And then I've been reading today that, well, actually may not be okay because you may still need to quarantine. Whereas other countries like Italy, like Greece, are saying come, because obviously the tourism industry has been hit majorly. I mean, what is it? I think 30% of the Spanish GDR is all about tourism. So what have your clients been saying to you? Because you also had a lot of clients traveling, or supposed to be traveling now.
Yeah, I mean, the hard thing has been getting people repatriated back into the UK, where I am. That was the initial stage. It was just making sure everybody was safe and everybody was back. And then the last sort of month or so have just been refunding packages and holidays. So it's all been about cancelling, which is not much fun as a travel agent, because I love putting together holidays and bookings and flights, and it's been the opposite. And it's, at the moment, it is very difficult to make any predictions regarding the immediate future, because it is changing all the time. It's changing every day, every couple of days there's a different announcement, and it is a big unknown. So it'd be unwise to make any short-term predictions. The future beyond the end of the year and next year, I think, is a bit easier to start to predict. This week alone, there's been 3 countries, Georgia, which is sort of wild place in Europe, which not many people are familiar with. I think quite a few birders do know it in Europe. They're really opening up really quickly. Iceland have been another one, which have been surprisingly quick at announcing that they want people back. And places like Greece are probably going to be one of the quicker countries to open up. So there are a few countries that are trying to get ahead of the game and open up. The reality is, though, that even though they may say it's okay to come in, your own country where you're coming from will have different ideas, and there'll be different restrictions in place. And the airlines are going to be restrictive. At the moment, it's so difficult in terms of booking anything, because the restrictions in place just haven't been thought out properly. And I think the future will be very different. I think next year, the way I see it is from January onwards next year, I've started putting together holidays. I booked a Caribbean trip for somebody just a week ago. So I'm quite confident in booking things from January onwards. Anything before that is a real unknown, and I wouldn't want to risk personally sort of booking anything before that. And it is very difficult to know, how quickly things will change. I think the key thing will be in the future will be the airlines will have to put in place ways of allowing people to travel safely. There'll be, I think in the future, there's going to be a lot of mask wearing on flights. There's going to be a lot of testing beforehand. Emirates this week have already introduced a test, which in 10 minutes can have a result as to whether you have the virus or whether you are infected. There's going to be a lot of checks. I think it's going to take a lot longer to go through all these processes. And all the countries are also going to have documents which they will require. And I wouldn't be surprised if there will be some kind of app that people will have in the future, which will show whether you've had the disease or whether you haven't and you have checked and you have been negative and you're okay to travel. So there are going to be a lot of restrictions, and it is still very early days. But it is going to be a different world when people travel. It's not going to be the same as it was before.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to your earlier point, your point you're making now about travel per se. But quick question, actually, in terms of repatriation. I've been watching. I mean, I'm in Spain, and I've been watching the BBC World News. And at halfway point, they always have this ad that says, "If you are traveling, get repatriated immediately, return home," which makes it seem as if it's really easy to do so. I presume there's a difference with each nationality because, for example, my ex is still in Peru. She can't get a flight, and it's May now. She won't be able to get a flight to at least June. I mean, for example, for British people, if I wanted to come back tomorrow, or if I was in Poland or somewhere, or even further afield, Indonesia, could I get a flight back theoretically?
It depends on the country. So with a lot of countries, there are still airlines are still running flights for repatriation. There's lots of cargo planes flying in and out all the time. And the airlines are also trying to keep some of the routes open, because if they stop flying completely, those routes, may be gone, and they won't be able to get them back when travel, sort of starts properly again. So a lot of the flights are still going, and people are still being repatriated back. By now, most people have managed to get back, the ones that acted quickly, but there are people still stuck in countries where there are no flights. And I mean, I had somebody in Mongolia, a client of mine, who was stuck potentially for a couple of months, and I did manage to get him a flight. It still took about 3 or 4 weeks longer than he should have been out there, but he did. We did manage to get him back eventually, and he famously posted online pictures of he'd gone out to see snow leopards, or hoped to see snow leopards, and I was afraid to ask him whether every time I spoke to him, often in the middle of the night, and he was getting more and more distressed about being out there long, and I just couldn't bring myself to even ask him if he'd actually seen them. And then I did find out and saw some incredible photos. So at least he did see them and get good shots of them. But he was tricky to get back because Mongolia had completely closed its borders. And people in South America, as you say, places like Peru, they've just stopped all the flights. And Asia is not so bad. There are a few of the airlines from the Middle East are still operating flights and keeping routes open. So some countries are harder than others. There are some people that didn't want to immediately come back. People who may have been traveling for years in Asia. They didn't want to rush back, or didn't have any reason to come back. So they'd stayed out there, sort of longer. And then suddenly now they're thinking, actually, maybe for security, I should be getting back home. So I think there are a few people that are still stuck. The majority of people have managed to get back. And some countries are trickier than others at the moment. Yeah.
I got a question from Claire.
Okay, you put me on the spot now. Hi, Sacha. Just fire up my video if it's going to fire up. I was just going to. Okay, oh, my video's gone. I was just going to ask you: have the cancellations and the repatriations that you've been doing, have they been covered by travel insurance? Or will travel companies cover future cancellations? You said if you're going to start doing bookings from January and suddenly things change again.
Yeah, I think at the moment what's been great is for future bookings is that certainly in the immediate future, a lot of the airlines are being very flexible. They do want people to book. They want people to start traveling again. And they want to get the confidence back in traveling. So they are being really flexible in terms of reassuring people that if they do book, certainly the bookings I've made have always been with the proviso that if somebody needs to change their flight a month or so before, they are able to do that, and their money is secure and the money is safe. And the airlines are being more flexible at the moment. I mean, this is only for the immediate sort of travel. So insurance, that's going to be tricky because it's unlikely that travel insurance will cover anything related to coronavirus in the future. So that is going to be tricky. So the ideal situation is going to be to book with a trusted agent and, sort of make sure that you're booking with somebody who can give you that reassurance that things can be changed if they need to be changed. And which is good for me because my company's been quite good in terms of being able to provide that reassurance. And I think there will be a switch from people booking online and booking direct more to using agents like myself, because it is such an unknown in the future and it is going to be quite tricky. But yeah, insurance is definitely going to be tricky. It's also going to be very expensive, I think, for insurance, which may put some people, sort of traveling off in the future. But that, again, it's still very early days, and maybe the insurance companies will realize that they can't put the prices up too much because nobody will travel. So, this is one of the things that will definitely be changing in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Claire, thank you. It's interesting you're talking about the actual travel industry as such. I mean, I'd like to know or have an inkling as to what will happen to airlines, for example, how are they going to cope? Because I've been seeing a lot of stuff on TV, a lot of speculation about how things will develop in the future. One such speculation is the fact that, flights will be kind of not as full as before, to try to some extent to actually kind of observe the social distancing business. But also, what about pricing? Because some people are saying that the flights may go up by up to 54% or more, or they might keep them low to get people on board, and then once the economy and once the whole thing starts picking up, then they bang, hit us with a really high fare to cover the losses they've made. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think initially the airlines would be unwise to put prices up straight away, because they've got to help themselves and help the whole travel industry and traveling. And already I've seen some ridiculously low prices for Europe for next Easter, for example. So in fact, if people are brave and they want to take a chance now and book flight tickets in advance, it is actually a really good time to do it. It's of course a bit of a gamble, because you may end up with a voucher which you then have to use again, for future travel. But I personally think, with the prices the way they are at the moment, I think it's worth taking advantage, and I don't think it's a huge risk to gamble on the destination being open next April, May, for example, in Europe, in Greece, and one of the low-cost airlines. So I think it's worth taking advantage of that. As to beyond that, the airlines will have definitely cut down the number of routes. They'll have less flights going. They'll have consolidated a lot of the planes into smaller routes, which will inevitably drive up prices. I don't think they'll be aiming to put the prices up to try and recoup money. I think prices will just automatically go up in the future because there'll be less flights. But I think people will still be traveling, but I think people will use the time that they travel wisely, and they will maybe go on less holidays, but they'll get more value out of those trips. So even though prices might be a bit higher on certain routes and certain countries, because if you think about it with hotels as well, and the places people will be traveling to, hygiene is going to be a major issue. And I don't know how many people will book Airbnbs and will book, certainly, looking about a year's time. Would you take a risk in knowing that hotel, the place you're staying in, is taking hygiene up to the maximum level and making sure that the rooms are thoroughly cleaned, when people depart? The big hotel chains and some of the hotels, the Accor group, for example, of hotels, which is a big chain around the world, they are really going ahead of everybody else and making sure that they have incredible hygiene certificates, and will be able to prove to people that the rooms are completely spotless when people go there. So I think that's going to be one key thing, is hygiene. And on planes, I think it's going to be really difficult to have spaces between seats on flights. And I don't know how much of a difference it would make if you've got somebody sort of behind you or somebody in front. I personally think that it's going to be better if they have masks. They'll probably have goggles and things like that in the future. When we're talking, sort of in the next year and a half, 2 years, they will have requirements for traveling. But yes, I think prices probably will start to go up, but I don't think it will put people off, because they will really get good value out of the trips that they're going on, rather than doing multiple trips each year, for example.
I've got a question here. I think it's from Ronique in Seattle. I think, because her name changes every time she comes on these things. She's now known as Joe. Hi. Initial stories from Asian countries that reopened were that national parks were overrun with tourists. How does the industry prevent this over-tourism, over-saturation, over-restrictions? Sorry, once restrictions are lifted, which kind of actually sort of leads into what I was going to ask you next anyway, which is, what do you think the shape of holidays will be from now on?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the issue with Asian parks being overrun. I mean, I was out in Thailand only well, it's probably about a year ago now, and I didn't find the national parks overrun. You tend to find that a lot of people head to the parks and just hang around the centres, or people who are not, you know, sort of true wildlife enthusiasts who are wandering off, you know, the wandering off the beaten path and going off into the more remote areas of the park. They tend to just stay around the main entrances and the main centres. So I wasn't aware that there was an issue with parks being overrun. I don't think people will be. I don't think it'll be an issue personally, and I think ecotourism is important. It's going to be more important now, especially if people have been they've woken up to the fact that there is all the wildlife out there that they hadn't noticed before. This is just people in general. So I think there will be a rise in ecotourism. I don't think personally it's going to be a problem with the way the parks manage it, because a lot of the parks they you know, it'd be detrimental to them if wildlife was affected. I think if that did get to that stage, I think they would have to control the number of people and limit it, and have passes which only allow a certain number of people in, which I know the American parks are quite good at that, as far as I'm aware. But I'll look into the Asian situation, because I didn't realize that was a problem. Yeah.
Do you think that from now on, people will be more interested in sort of individual experiences, or like in a couple or family group now, as opposed to, you know, all piling into places where there's lots of people?
They'll definitely be avoiding people will definitely be avoiding crowded places, which I think is good for ecotourism, because most of the places that we tend to visit as birders and wildlife enthusiasts are remote. They're outside. They are away from the crowded markets, the crowded sites like the Taj Mahal and all the famous tourist sites. So I think it's good for companies that are involved in wildlife tourism, because I think there will be a surge. As to whether people will be afraid of traveling in a group rather than traveling in their own, you know, sort of family or with friends, I think that could be an initial worry. But with documentation, and I think there will be all sorts of apps, there'll be all sorts of documents people will have. I don't think that will be as much of an issue in the future. So I can't see it to be too much of a change from what it is now in terms of you know, wildlife tourism.
That's interesting, because when you look at the world now, you look around, you know, in America and even in the UK, but in Europe and other places, you know, people are just beginning to say, you know what, we're going back to normal, whether you like it or not, or whoever likes it or not. And some people are actually not observing the, you know, the social distancing. I mean, the American president's not even wearing masks. That's obviously sending out lots of mixed messages. And I think I get the feeling that, you know, humans always seem to have a very short memory, and maybe, you know, come July, which seems to be the time that everyone's sort of ear tagging as being the moment when we kind of let the floodgates open and start tourism up again. I think maybe people might actually not even worry so much as we are perhaps today. Do you think that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at what happened in Australia, they sort of announced that it's okay to go to the beach, and the beaches were overrun with people. People do have a short-term memory, but when it comes to traveling on the actual flights and restrictions in the countries that people are going to, it's not as simple as that. You know, there will be some strict restrictions in place, and people will have to follow guidelines. Once people arrive in the countries, you know, that is a different matter. But you know, people will still be cautious, and I think it'd be unwise to just think that it is going back to as it was before, because it is going to be a very different world. but people, like myself, are extremely passionate about travel and wildlife, and I can't wait to get back out and travel again. I was watching a documentary only a couple of days ago, and it was a UK documentary about Simon Reeves, who's a travel writer and filmmaker, and he was doing something about the Mediterranean, and suddenly I realized how much I do miss traveling. Just seeing that, it's incredible. But so there will be a lot of people that can't wait, and certainly a lot of my clients, they say to me, that they want to travel as soon as possible, and they can't wait to be able to travel again. So I think people will slowly return to the normal, but it will definitely not be the same as before. That is for sure.
Well, I think, in terms of the actual travel part, when you get to the airport, that's going to be very different now, isn't it? It's going to be very much spatially divided and a lot more time to be spent going through. And I remember when we first had to start going through security and everyone's moaning about it, it was going to slow us all down, which it did. But then, you get used to it, I suppose, and you kind of becomes the new normal. Claire's been saying some people have been rebooking for June, July this year already. Is that a bit optimistic?
Personally, yes, I think it is. I think I can't see the countries, the airlines just getting up to speed to be able to allow people to travel that soon. As somebody who works in travel, I probably shouldn't be saying that. I should be saying the opposite. And realistically, I personally think that it is too soon to rebook something then. And to be on the safe side, I'm looking at sort of January, February, sort of onwards of next year for a realistic time period of when people can travel. Having said that, there may be countries that, Greece are stepping up and trying to get people in quickly. And I think they're working on the basis that people could travel this summer. However, your own country may have, sort of different thought about that. And it may be that they will still have restrictions in place, which just make it, very difficult to do that. Certainly, if you're rebooking for that early on, just make sure there is the flexibility and you are able to change it, sort of as you get nearer the time. But as long as you've got the flexibility, then it's worth a shot, I guess. But personally, I think that's probably going to be a bit too soon. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what Ronique in America thinks in terms of how people are sort of thinking about travel there. But in Europe, as I said before, there seems to be this kind of situation where come July, we may be able to move more freely. If you were based in the UK, would you think that if you were going to travel anywhere, I suppose Europe, would that be the best place to go to initially?
Yes, although I think the domestic markets, probably in America as well, you may find that people this summer are going to be traveling. They are going to want to go away on holiday, but they may be looking within their own country. And I think, sort of in the UK, for example, I think it's going to be a lot of people traveling domestically. And I would have thought in America, it'll be a similar situation. I would have thought people will be traveling initially just within the States as the lockdown starts to ease. But I think if you're doing that, you probably want to get in there quite quickly because I think there's going to be such demand that it's going to be difficult to find places to stay and sort of to get things booked up because there will be such a rush of people booking domestically. Having said that, there may be countries, for example, Georgia, making an announcement that they want people to travel there. And so that could be, there may be a few options in Europe. And for people who are thinking outside the box and are thinking of something, slightly different, there may be a few countries that are safe there and opening up quicker than others. I think you gave the example of Iceland and Georgia, for example. So, sort of they may be the ones that you might be able to travel to. Sorry, what's that?
Baltic states. I mean, I've seen that they've opened up quite early, haven't they? But to
Yeah,
people
yeah, exactly, exactly. You know, and there's some great, you know, there's some great countries, especially for wildlife. And you know, there's places like Latvia and Estonia, and you know, great during migration, great during the early part of summer as well. So if they open up their borders early enough, there could be some good destinations that you can go to, and that are going to be reasonably safe once you're there, because you're going to be out in the wilderness, you know, and away from people, on the whole, as long as traveling itself is being made safe enough by that time.
that's an interesting point about going somewhere that's safe. So obviously those countries you mentioned are safe because they've had low incidences of coronavirus thus far, touch wood. But Ronique's asked an interesting question. She says, your thoughts, please. Many countries rely on wealthy, in inverted commas, American visitors visiting. However, with America having 1/3 of worldwide COVID cases, is it possible that countries will initially say no to the USA outbound travelers, or will the dollar bill rule? And it's the same thing for the UK as well. I mean, let's look at the top 3 or 4 countries that have had the highest death rates and infection rates. You know, you've got America, you've got the UK, you've got Spain, you've got Italy, and also Brazil now.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think there will, those countries that are desperate to get people.
Oh, sorry, this is from Joe, not Ronique. Sorry, Joe.
That's all right. I think the countries that are desperate to get people back, because tourism is such a key thing, and I do really feel for some of the countries like Madagascar, for example. It's a place that I love visiting, but I was really surprised by the level of poverty there, and they really need, you know, sort of people to go out there. They've got pockets of reserves which are being protected, but unless people are traveling out there visiting, and the economy is benefiting from the dollar, from euros, they are really going to suffer. So I don't think they'll put restrictions in place in terms of where people are coming from for certain countries. It's, you know, it's whether people will have the confidence to travel to places like that, as long as the safety, as long as they can guarantee safety and security, and as long as the airlines can also guarantee safety and security. So I think they'd be unwise to put restrictions on certain countries only. I think if they open up, they'll probably open up to most countries. With regards to, for example, in the UK, at the moment, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks if you travel. So it's pretty much effectively stopping people from traveling at the moment. I think that will be eased, and that will have to change. With America, it'll be interesting to see how quickly people do start sort of traveling abroad. But I don't think the countries will put restrictions on specific countries only. I think they'd be unwise to do that. Yeah.
You know, you talked about quarantine. So, for example, people in UK anyone coming to the UK at the moment will have to quarantine for 2 weeks. But let's face it, how can they police that? You know, I can just dress and I'll say,
it's
I'm on my holiday.
That's the thing. They can't. They just have to rely on people saying that is what they're doing, which is why it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction ruling that's been put into place to show that they are doing the right thing by protecting people in their own countries. But to be honest, it's not workable, and it's not something that is going to last for long. I think that restriction will be eased as other countries start to prove that there is less of an issue with the virus in their own countries. I mean, it'd be interesting to see whether places like China, for example, you know, sort of start letting people in, because that may be one of the sort of safer places to go to. And you know, it's got some great bird migration there in sort of May time, and a lot of my clients were booked to travel out earlier this year. So it'll be interesting to see whether they rebook and decide to travel out next April, May. It'll be good to see which countries do open up their borders earlier than others, and where the trends are going to be, which at the moment it's too early to say, but there'll be some good countries opening up sooner rather than later. I get the feeling. Yeah.
Okay, now is the time to open the floor to all the Zoomers out there. I'm sure there's many travel people in the lineup tonight, and there must be a question or two from someone about what we've been talking about tonight.
You can see Nigel waving.
Nigel.
Oh, hang on.
Hi, Nigel. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Hi, Sacha.
We can also see you levitating.
Yes.
Hang on. Whoop. Sorry about that. First of all, thank you for all your help over the last couple of years with various bits and pieces.
No, pleasure.
The question, I'm booked to go to the Gambia in November this year. Now, assuming, my worry is, okay, let's assume that the flights go ahead, all the testing is in place, etc., etc. We've got the apps, you know, certificates, whatever we need, social distancing on the plane. Then we get to the Gambia, and let's say there's 10 of us, and we all pile into a minibus with a local guide, a local driver. You know, that's a big concern.
Yeah. No, I do get that. I think I think everybody will need to have documentation in place, or some kind of proof that they have been tested, and that I know there's never a guarantee, but I think the people you're traveling with and the company that you're booked with will have to guarantee that every precaution has been taken, in terms of the people that you're traveling with, the guide, and the places that you're staying. Yes. So it is going to be tricky, and it's whether they can get that all in place by November. You know, so so I totally understand your concerns, and it may be that that trip is probably shifted to a year's time beyond that, realistically, because it is going to be very difficult to put all those guarantees in place. Maybe, I may be completely wrong, and there may be things will pick up pace, and there will be, sort of ways to prove that it is safe, or as safe as possible. I think there's always going to be elements of risk in the future, but if that risk is minimized, and you are then traveling and you're confident that the people you're traveling with, have gone through every possible screening, and the airlines will definitely have the screening in place anyway. And in terms of, it's interesting what you say about the guides and the drivers and so on, because that is going to be harder to put into place. And I think the company that you're booking with will have to have, sort of documentation from those people as well. So there's a lot of things that need to change in terms of the future for travel, and it may be that November will rush around, and they might have to postpone that trip.
Yes, I'm thinking in terms of starting again next year, the same as you. I'm booked to Costa Rica in January, and I think I'm going to write off the Gambia and one or two other places and just leave this year. It'll fly by.
Yeah, but it's going to be tricky, because you won't be able to cancel this far ahead, or not cancel, postpone this far ahead. You'll have to wait till nearer the time. Yes. And then it could get tricky by that stage if the trip's deemed to be going ahead, but you personally would rather that it should. Hopefully the travel company will do the right thing and will just say, not a problem, we'll just shift it all across, which is what I've been doing for most of the people that I had booked in the next 3-4 months.
I've got a trip to Mallorca booked next month. Obviously, this was booked months and months ago. And funnily enough, amazingly, I've just had an email from Ryanair saying your flights have been cancelled. You will get a full refund in 20 days.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard bad things about Ryanair. I'll believe it when I see the money in my account. But
the different airlines, it's been interesting to see which airlines have been good to their clients and to travel agents, because we've been in that, personally, have been in that situation where it's been really difficult to get money back from certain airlines. Other airlines have been better than others. Some of the low-cost airlines like Ryanair that you mentioned, they've been slow in refunding, but they have been refunding. And EasyJet, for example, they do refund eventually. Some other airlines, some of the random ones like Royal Air Maroc and other countries' airlines have been really difficult in terms of providing any kind of refund or any kind of contact as well. It's been impossible to get hold of some airlines. So yeah, it varies from airline to airline, but hopefully you'll get it back quicker rather than late. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sacha. Good to meet you.
You too.
Cheers.
I always love the way that Nigel levitates when he's talking. It's quite
Yeah.
Joe has asked a question. Do you think the mega cruise ship industry will bounce back?
Well, that's the one industry that's probably been hit the hardest. And I was reading only this morning about staff on cruise ships who are pretty much stranded off the coast of America, and they can't get back. They can't leave the ship, and they're kind of imprisoned on these huge cruise ships. I think it will bounce back, but it's going to be very slow. I think that will be one of the last sectors that will come back, which is a real shame for places like, sort of Antarctica and, there's amazing wildlife destinations and Galapagos and places where, cruising is a big part of it. They will come back, but it's going to be slow. And personally, I can't see people booking onto cruises for a while, because that is the one thing that's been really, really affected around the world. But slowly it will. They've got a lot of money, the cruise ships, and the ships are there. They will want to get people on. There'll probably be some amazing deals to try and encourage people, but it's whether they can prove and assure people that it is safe to do so. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe was actually saying that there's 100,000 cruise ship staff still stranded, which is like a phenomenal number.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Amanda. Do you think that the cost of insurance for COVID-19, will be restrictive for a long time? Wildlife tours are usually fairly expensive, and medical care in other countries will surely need to be covered. Why would anyone travel without cover?
I think you will still be able to get cover. The cover will probably be more expensive, but there'll be clauses. For example, you won't probably be able to cancel if you fell ill from the virus beforehand, which is going to be tricky. So it is going to be a risk. So as long as you are confident and we are in a situation where we know that it is safe in the country that we're originating in terms of personally, there may be people who've already contracted it and are less likely to get it again. And the insurance will still cover medically when you are abroad, but probably not for things that are related to the virus beforehand. So if you suddenly have to cancel because a country has gone into lockdown again, they're going to be the kind of things that insurers are going to move away from. But travel providers and travel agents will probably be able to then provide the assurance that things can be moved on to a different date. So it is going to be tricky with insurance. It will be more expensive, but I still think you will be able to get insurance to cover medically while you're away.
Okay. Joe has also just added that in the US, many travel insurance companies offer you coverage for pre-existing only if you purchase insurance within 2 weeks of booking the holiday.
So is that only if you purchase it, so that they can be sure that you're not going to suddenly fall ill? Presumably, is that what the insurers do? That's not something I'm familiar with as a European travel agent, because normally the whole point of insurance is, you know, to make sure that you're getting coverage from the moment you book it, so as early as possible. So that's interesting that they will offer insurance so close to departure, but that still defeats the object of insurance. So I don't know personally on the situation with American insurers. I just know with regards to the European insurance that I'm more used to selling on that.
Yeah, and Peter Lomas has made a comment saying, with regards to airlines' responsiveness, many have a lot of staff, admin, as well as flight crews on furlough, so don't have the bandwidth to cope with the volume of changes.
Yeah, no, that has been an issue with a lot of the airlines, and that's really where I've come into my own in terms of being able to help and get people there. That's what I've been doing for the last couple of months, is getting as much of a cash refund back for people as possible. So it's worked in my favor that there are people who will only book with me now in the future, and you know, it's been good in that respect. Not that I've made any money out of it at the moment, because it's just been cancelling one booking after the other, but hopefully for the future people will use agents rather than booking things direct, because we have a lot more power in terms of contacting airlines, in terms of being able to sort refunds than some people who may have booked direct. But yes, it is true. It's understandable that the airlines have been slow at the moment, but there's definitely some that have been better than others out there. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's actually worth pointing out that your company, Travel Counsellors, have actually been voted the #1 in terms of responding to situations like this.
Yeah, that was great to see that this morning. So we were voted as the best company in terms of the current situation and refund, which is great. Which it shows that all the hard work that I've been doing does get noticed, and hopefully will mean that in the future, you know, it works out well. It's just a case of a waiting game now, and waiting to see when we can start sort of booking holidays properly. That's the one thing that a lot of us are doing, even the one, you know, people who want to travel and us as agents. It's a bit of a waiting game at the moment.
Anyone else in the Zoom room that wants to ask a question? Ask Sacha a question about travel. Now's your chance. Anything you've ever wanted to ask?
As long as it's about travel or birds, yes.
Sacha, I've got one.
Okay.
Oh, I found my video up this time. Do you think we got too used to low-cost, cheap travel? Because I mean, I remember back in the day, probably when I first started traveling, that it was something that you had to think about. You decided where you were going to go, because you couldn't decide, oh, I'll go off here this week, somewhere else next week.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that
definitely.
Where we're
I think
get back to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. People were getting so used to just going away for a weekend, you know, sort of last minute. You know, I even remember situations where people would just turn up at airports with their bags and just book whatever's the cheapest destination. That's not going to be happening again. I think people will put thought into their holidays. I think people will. There's obviously going to be a lot more planning. There's going to be a lot more red tape in terms of travel, which will make my job sort of harder, but you know, that's what I'll be there for, to assist with travel. So yeah, I think the days of just being able to just sort of hop on a plane at random at a weekend, I think will definitely have changed. Maybe, you know, in 3, 4, 5 years time, that might start to return to those levels, but certainly for the next 2 or 3 years, I just can't see that being the case. And in fact, I was talking to David only a couple of months ago, and I kept saying, "Oh, I'm definitely going to come out to see you out in Spain and go birding in Extremadura." And I kept putting it off, and you know, now look, it's not even a situation where I can just suddenly hop on a plane like I thought I always could. And I wish I had come out now.
Yeah, but even I can't go birding in Extremadura. So
Yeah, that's true. That
Amanda,
is true.
Amanda, in your opinion, she's asking, what is the best place in the world to go birding? Personally,
Oh.
Wormwood Scrubs, West London. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a bit. Yeah, I'm not sure I would put it up there. I'm fond of Wormwood Scrubs, but I mean, I absolutely love the Himalayas, but that's just because of loving mountains and the scenery and the birds with all the Himalayan monals and the pheasants. And I love Asian birding, and I think migrants, the islands in Thailand are another one of my favorite places. The thing is that I just love pretty much every country I've been to. I mean, they're all just, you know, sort of different and have such diverse wildlife. Each one is different. It's hard to say one true favorite. But I am definitely fond of Thailand, actually, because of the food, the people, and some good birding and great migration that takes place there as well. So that's probably my favorite.
Okay, anyone else for questions? Okay, well,
everyone's quite shy.
Yeah, they're very shy. I'm sure they'll be asking other questions once I turn record off. But
Yeah.
anyway, one question for you, Sacha, talking about favourite countries and stuff. What is your favourite bird?
Oh, well, like countries, that varies month by month, I'd say. I've got great fond memories of watching merlins hunting small birds on my beloved Blakeney Point in Norfolk. So I'd probably, everyone goes for peregrine, but merlin is a great little falcon and absolute joy to watch sort of hunting out over the shingle. So I'd probably go with merlin, but that'll probably change next month.
I know you're a big mothing man, because I've seen lots of your posts on Twitter. So the other question I was going to ask you is what your favourite insect was.
Yeah, well, it probably would have to be a moth, and there is nothing more bizarre than the death's head hawk moth, which squeaks when you hold it. Has got incredible pattern on its skull on its the back, and is quite rare as well in the UK. So that's probably my favourite one. I've only seen it once in the UK.
Really?
Okay.
Excuse me. Notwithstanding the coronavirus pandemic, where would you be on this planet right now if you could be somewhere?
Apart from Extremadura, with sort of watching bustards and larks with you, David, I'd probably go for. Well, I mentioned Thailand already, and I do absolutely love the country. So I'd probably be on one, especially at this time of year when there's pitters migrating through and lots of warblers and pipits and wagtails. I'd be on one of the remote islands south of the Gulf in Thailand.
Beautiful. And Sean wants to know, if you were to choose a European destination to go birding, where would it be?
Oh, well, at this time of year, I'd probably go with Latvia, only because I've just absolutely loved the spectacle of watching huge funnels of birds in the morning spiraling round some of the headlands. Just a vast number of migrants moving through at this time of year. I mean, you get it in the States as well. I've got fond memories of being in the Keys and watching all the warblers and the waves, as they call them out there, of passerines. So I probably, I think Latvia is up there as one of my favorite ones. But obviously I'm half Italian, so I'd have to also say Italy is another one of my top countries.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I love the Baltic states, all three of them, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, Serbia, of course, and Spain, well, goes without saying, but I also love the UK. Coming up in Conservation With series, tomorrow we got my good friend Martin Kelsey, who is actually based in Extremadura, and he'll be talking about birding in this Spanish region. And that's tomorrow at 7 o'clock. On Wednesday, you may have to sort of not go to work and join us at 10 in the morning, because I have Luke Patterson, who is a guide in the Northern Territory of Australia, and he'll be talking live from Australia about birding in the Northern Territory, Darwin, Kakadu, and all those wonderful places. And then through the course of the week, I've got a few more people. We're just basically cementing them down now. There's going to be a guy talking about Mongolia, birding in Mongolia, another guy talking about birding in Colombia, and I've got someone talking about India as well. And then the following week, we're going to go back to random sort of subjects, starting off with on Monday the 25th with Per Ahlstrom, who will be talking about taxonomy, talking about different types of species that are still out there to be discovered, and some of them still under our noses. And I'll have people like Miriam Darlington, who is a writer, talking about how she gets her ideas for writing her books on wildlife. Another writer called Stephen Moss will be here, and to kind of give us a rough introduction into nature writing. And yeah, we've got Joe Harkness, who will be talking about mental health and depression. So we've got quite a mixed range of stuff. So keep an eye on the website, because they're all coming on as soon as I get their photographs, because it's one thing agreeing, it's the next thing trying to get them to send us a photograph of themselves. But Sacha, I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone for coming along and sparing an hour of your time to talk to us about a subject which isn't really easy to talk about, because it's like fluid. It keeps on changing. I mean, tomorrow maybe something completely different. But thank you very much for anyway coming along.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. It's good to see everyone and to speak to you as well. But thank you for the opportunity. It's great.
And I hope to see everyone in the upcoming interviews we have. But in the meantime, stay safe and don't forget to keep looking up. Thanks a lot, everyone.